Harold woke up, as usual, too early and too alone. The clock on the old dresser showed 5:47. It was gloomy outside. Spring just couldn't seem to find its way, even though the calendar stubbornly insisted it was April. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Ever since Eleanor had left, silence had become Harold's constant companion. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his temples. Back in the day, Eleanor would already be putting the kettle on and turning on the radio. The radio had long gone silent. But the kettle he still put on. Habit was stronger than grief. In the corner stood her rocking chair. A half-finished gray scarf lay on the armrest. Harold was afraid to touch it, as if it were something sacred. It had been 10 months since she left, yet he still couldn't get used to the thought that he would never hear her voice again, never see her smile as she tilted her head over a cup of chamomile tea. His pension was enough to live on, but just barely. Most of it went to rent, food, and medicine. Sometimes he thought all of this was a mistake. That things could still somehow go back to the way they were. But with each passing week, that hope dimmed. That morning, he decided to go out. Just like that. No reason. He put on his brown coat, grabbed his old hat, and headed toward the city center. It was Tuesday, a day when nothing happens. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane. People hurried past, not noticing the gray-haired man with eyes that held something deeper than age. Stopping at a bus stop, he sat down on the wooden bench. Across the street was a cafe where he and Eleanor used to drink hot chocolate. Now the window display was full of bright pastries, but Harold didn't feel hungry. Someone sat down next to him. A young man in a plain dark jacket, a cap, and sunglasses. Harold barely glanced at him, but the man spoke first. "Good morning." Harold gave a slight nod, not expecting more. But the stranger wasn't the silent type. "Bit chilly today. Even spring doesn't want to get out of bed," he said with a soft smile. Harold unexpectedly smiled back. "Yeah, spring's not in a hurry this year." "I'm Adam," the man said simply, holding out his hand. Harold was slightly surprised. Who greets strangers these days? But he shook the hand. "Harold. Nice to meet you, Harold. Do you come here often?" "Sometimes. When the silence at home gets too loud." Adam tilted his head slightly, as if hearing more than just words. He pulled a paper coffee cup from his pocket and took a sip. Then he pulled out a second cup and offered it. "Want some?" "No, thank you. My stomach's not what it used to be," Harold replied with a smile. For a while, they sat in silence. People passed by. A bus arrived, then left. But Adam stayed. Finally, he turned to Harold and said quietly, "You know, Harold, sometimes a chance encounter can change more than years of life." Harold looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Adam didn't answer right away. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a folded bill. Held it out to Harold. "This is for you." "What?" Harold pulled back. I'm not asking for money. I don't need charity." "I'm not giving charity," Adam said gently. "It's just a gift." "No reason." "For what?" "Just because. Today, you reminded me of something important. And I want to give you a small gift. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe, it's everything." Harold looked at the outstretched hand for a long time. He wasn't used to receiving. All his life, he'd been the one who gave. He didn't want to look needy. But Adam's eyes were sincere, with no trace of pity. There was kindness in them. And finally, Harold took the bill. "Thank you," he said softly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," said Adam as he stood. "Just, spend it on something that makes you smile. Even for a moment." He nodded, adjusted his cap, and walked off toward the park. Harold watched him go for a long time. When Adam turned the corner, Harold unfolded the bill. $100. Real. He held it in his hand for a long time, then carefully folded it and tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat. He didn't know what he would do with the money. He didn't know who that strange man named Adam really was. But something inside him shifted. As if someone had cracked open a window in a sealed room. He stood up from the bench and glanced at the cafe window. There was the table. By the window. Where he and Eleanor had sat 10 years ago, when she first said, "You should write a book about us. So we won't be forgotten." Harold adjusted his hat, straightened his back. And walked. Not home. To the bookstore. They sold notebooks there. The good kind. Thick, sturdy. The kind you write important things in. The bookstore Harold stepped into hadn't changed in 30 years. The creaky wooden floor, the scent of paper and a hint of spicy dust. Everything here was a reminder of the past, something you could still touch, open, flip through. Harold didn't believe in e-books. For him, reading was a ritual, the cover, the pages, bookmarks, and the smell of printing ink. The shop's owner, Mrs. Pendleton, was a woman in her 60s with a crown of silver hair and eyes like cornflowers. She knew Harold by face, though they weren't close. He rarely bought anything. More often, he simply wandered among the shelves, occasionally picking up a book, flipping through it, and putting it back. But today, he walked straight to the counter. "Good morning, Mrs. Pendleton." "Harold." "Good morning." She looked slightly surprised by his sense of purpose. "Looking for something?" "A notebook," he said confidently. "I want to write a story." "An autobiography?" "Maybe. Or maybe fiction. Who knows? Sometimes the past and imagination blend so closely you can't tell them apart." She smiled and led him to the display of notebooks. Harold chose a simple one, hardcover, dark blue fabric binding. The pages were slightly rough, perfect for a black ink pen. He ran his finger over the first page. Blank. Like a fresh page of life. He walked to the register and handed her the notebook. From his inner pocket, he pulled out a folded $100 bill. "Here," he said softly. "Please." Mrs. Pendleton took the bill carefully, as if it were made of gold, and without asking questions, gave him his change. "Write, Harold. Write everything that's in your heart." He nodded. Something warm stirred inside him. He hadn't felt this kind of gentle excitement in a long time, like a teenager entrusted with an important mission. He tucked the notebook into his canvas bag and stepped outside. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he stopped by the little cafe across from the bus stop, the one where he used to sit with Eleanor. Inside, it was cozy, filled with the smell of cinnamon and roasted beans. Harold picked a table by the window. The same one. As if he had traveled back in time. The waitress, a young woman with freckles and sad eyes, approached with a notepad. "What can I get you?" He paused. "Do you have hot chocolate?" "Of course." "Whipped cream?" "Yes," he smiled. "And marshmallows, if possible." "Of course." While she walked away, he pulled out the notebook and placed it in front of him. The page was still blank. He took out his pen, carefully unscrewed the cap, and paused. What to write? A story? A letter to Eleanor? Or just thoughts? At that moment, a man stepped out onto the street. Harold instinctively turned to the window, and froze. It was the same man from the bus stop. Adam. He was still wearing that cap and jacket. Only now, he walked unhurriedly, holding a paper bag. He paused at the corner, greeted someone, shook a hand, and kept walking. Who is he? Harold wondered. Too ordinary to be a celebrity, too soulful to be a random passerby. The hot chocolate arrived. Harold took the mug in his hands. A soft shiver touched his lips as he took the first sip. Too sweet, just how Eleanor liked it. He closed his eyes. "You should write a book about us," echoed in his head again. He opened the notebook and wrote the first line. "When you're 78, you suddenly begin to realize that the most important encounters are the accidental ones." He didn't write a name. Not yet. But something opened inside him, as if water had begun seeping through a crack in stone. He wrote for another 20 minutes, until the hot chocolate went cold. A few paragraphs, about Eleanor, about the empty house, about meeting Adam. Then he stopped. He felt a tear roll down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Didn't hide it. This notebook wasn't a diary. It was something more. A way to bring back a part of himself he thought was gone. Back home, the first thing Harold did was pull out an old box from the closet. Inside were letters, photos, postcards. Everything that remained from a long life together. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. But now something drew him to it, as if the words he had written had become a key. He pulled out a photo, old, slightly faded. Eleanor was laughing, covering her mouth with her hand. The photo was taken in 1981, on the beach. He sat down in the armchair and looked at it for a long time, until it grew dark. The next day, he returned to the same bus stop. Sat on the same bench. But Adam wasn't there. He came again. And again. But the man with the kind eyes never showed up. Still, Harold kept writing. He'd wake up, have breakfast, go to the cafe, order hot chocolate, and write. Stories about love. About loss. About how one day, someone gave him $100, and that became the turning point. A week later, a letter arrived in the mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a card with a short message. Some gifts can't be measured in money. Keep writing. Adam. Harold froze. He didn't know how Adam had found his address. He didn't know why he had written. But his heart beat faster. He gently placed the card next to Eleanor's photo. Then he opened the notebook and wrote. Adam Sandler. The man from the stop. He thinks he gave me $100. But in truth, he gave me a second spring. A week passed. Then another. Harold kept writing. He no longer wondered whether it was good or bad, he just wrote. Sometimes it turned into full chapters, sometimes just 3 or 4 lines. But he could feel it, life was pulsing through him again. As if the words, pouring onto the paper, were reclaiming time from the silence. Not the empty silence he had grown used to over the years, but that heavy, muffled one, the kind without meaning or hope. Every morning started the same, hot chocolate at the cafe, a table by the window, and his notebook. The waitress, a young woman named Clara, already knew his favorite order. Their short but sincere conversation started to become a routine. "Are you a writer?" she asked one day as she set down the aromatic drink. "No," Harold chuckled. "Just an old man with too many memories." "So you write about life?" He nodded. "Then you are a writer." That simple exchange of words affected him more than he expected. He watched Clara walk off to other tables and thought, the world is still full of people who can see beyond what's written on the surface. One evening, on his way home, he noticed something unusual. In the neighboring building, where usually only one window was lit, now 2 were glowing. The second one, the one facing the street, near his kitchen, was now brightly illuminated, and someone was moving inside. A new neighbor? Harold hadn't felt curious in years, but now he walked closer to his window. In the dim light, he made out the silhouette of a man in a dark hoodie and cap. The figure looked familiar. Harold's heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. He let the curtain fall, sat in his armchair, and stared into space. Could it be Adam? The next day, he didn't go to the cafe. He stayed home, as if expecting something. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. Slow, but steady. Harold walked over and opened it, and there he was. That very man. In a jacket, cap, and a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. The same smile, slow and deep, spread across his face. "Hello, Harold," he said. "It's you." Harold's voice trembled. I didn't think we'd meet again." "Well, I figured it was time to visit an old friend." They went inside. Harold put the kettle on, set the table, and brought out some cookies and leftover Christmas candy. Adam looked around. "It's cozy here. Feels real. The kind of place that breathes memory." "It breathes silence," Harold corrected him. "But not so empty anymore." Adam sat down, took off his cap, and ran a hand through his hair. "I read something," he said, pulling out printed pages from his bag. His voice was gentle. "You left some drafts at the cafe. I think by accident. Or maybe fate." Harold blushed. "I didn't think anyone would find them." "But I did," Adam said calmly. "And you know what? It's beautiful. It's honest. Most importantly, it matters. People need this." He placed the pages on the table. "You have a gift. And you need to share it." Harold lowered his gaze. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to praise. Especially from someone like him. He knew who Adam Sandler was, not just an actor, but someone deeply respected for his warmth and simplicity. But he still didn't understand, why was he here? Why had he come back, to him? "Why did you help me back then?" Harold finally asked. "Why give me that money?" Adam paused. "Because I saw the way you look at life. From the side, but with love. Because you were on the edge, but you didn't step over it. That meant there was still something alive in you. I just gave you a reason to remember it." He stood and paced the room. "Sometimes I forget why I do all this. Filming, scenes, roles, premieres. Sometimes I just want to sit down and have a real conversation. No cameras. No laughter. And you became that person. Accidental, but real." Harold felt tears rise again. Not from sadness, from gratitude. He stood and walked slowly to his desk. Opened a drawer and took out a slim book. The notebook. It was nearly full. He handed it to Adam. "I want you to read this. If you really believe someone needs it, the choice is yours." Adam accepted the notebook with the reverence of someone holding a priceless artifact. "I'll think of a way to show it to people. Quietly. Without fanfare. Just so anyone who feels forgotten will know, they're not alone." They drank tea in silence. For a long time. Then Adam left. And Harold watched him from the window. And suddenly realized, his home felt brighter. Not just from the lights. From within. A week later, Harold received a letter. Inside was an envelope, thin as a breath. Inside, a business card and a short note. "Harold, your story will soon see the light. You've become the voice of those who were unheard. Adam." On the business card it said, "Sandler Stories. A new series. Based on real lives." From that day on, every evening, people started coming to his house. Some rang the doorbell and brought postcards. Some left flowers on the porch. Some asked for autographs. At first Harold felt shy, then he got used to it. He understood, his story had become part of something bigger. Not because it was special. But because it was alive. And one evening, lying on the couch, Harold whispered into the empty room. "Thank you, Adam. You didn't just bring back my interest in life. You gave me life itself." When Harold's name first appeared on the screen, he didn't immediately realize it was about him. A video had just been uploaded to YouTube titled, $1 Can Change a Life. The Story of Harold. The description had only one sentence. Adam Sandler finds inspiration in a chance encounter with a lonely elderly man, who turned out to be more than just a passerby. The video began with soft music and shots of the city, the very streets Harold walked every day, never imagining they might interest anyone. Then Adam appeared on screen, no makeup, no lights, no stage. Just sitting in an armchair at home, holding a cup of coffee, telling the story of how one day he gave an old man $100. "I didn't know his name," he said to the camera. "I just felt like he was on the edge. Not because of poverty, because of silence. You know, that kind of silence where a person stops hearing themselves." And then came those pages. Those lines. I couldn't believe that the man I met on the corner carried such depth inside him. 7 million people watched the video in 2 days. That evening, someone knocked on Harold's door again. But this time it wasn't just one person, it was 3. A young guy with a camera, a woman with a microphone, and an elderly journalist in a dusty coat. "Mr. Finch? We're from A Word for the Heart. May we ask you a few questions?" Harold didn't know what to say. Out of habit, he fixed his hair, put on his old sweater, and opened the door. "I'm not a celebrity," he said quietly. "You're the man who inspired Sandler himself. That's more than enough." They came inside. The journalist asked simple, sincere questions, about life, books, loneliness. Harold answered slowly, not looking into the camera. But each word struck a chord with someone out there, beyond the screen. After they left, he sat by the window for a long time. A cup of tea stood on the windowsill, cold. The phone kept ringing in the kitchen, it hadn't stopped since that day. Clara, the waitress from the coffee shop, brought him a note. "Someone left this for you." On the paper, just 2 lines. "You gave a voice to those who stayed silent. Thank you for existing. M." The signature was smudged. Harold kept the note inside a book of poems. Then came a letter. A real one, paper, with a seal. On the envelope, handwritten. Invitation. Los Angeles. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside. "Dear Mr. Finch. Adam Sandler invites you to a charity evening dedicated to the project Voices Without Echo, an initiative inspired by your story. We would be honored if you would agree to read one of your stories on stage. With gratitude and respect. Sandler Foundation." Harold sat down. He read the letter 3 times. Him? On stage? The road to Los Angeles was long. They helped him with the tickets, hotel, even clothes. For the first time in years, Harold wore a new jacket. He felt like an old student at his first dance. Everything inside him trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. When he entered the hotel lobby, Adam himself greeted him. "I'm so glad you came," he said, hugging Harold tightly. "You deserve to be heard." Harold felt something shift inside again, not painfully, but gently. He nodded and whispered. "I thought my life was over. But you showed me it had only just begun." The stage was bathed in soft light. The hall was full, hundreds of people. Young and old, actors and everyday folks. Harold stepped out, holding a printed copy in his hands. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't afraid. He felt at home. He began to read the story, the very one he had written in the week after meeting Adam. The hall was silent. And then, applause. Long honest. After the event, people approached him. Some hugged him, some asked for photos, some simply said, "You reminded me of my father. Because of you, I called my grandmother. You gave me the courage to start writing again." He didn't know what to say. He just nodded. And inside, something stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. He believed in the power of words again. Adam came up to him closer to midnight. They stood on the terrace. "You know, Harold," he said, "the world became a better place today. Because you had the courage to say out loud what so many are afraid to even think." Harold looked down at the city. The lights, the noise, the life. "Thank you, Adam. Not for the fame. For seeing me on that street corner, and not walking past. Sometimes," Adam said, "to change the world, all it takes is hearing the quiet voice in the crowd." They stood in silence for a long time. The evening was warm. Stars sparkled above them, like long-forgotten names finally given a chance to be spoken. 6 months had passed since that evening in Los Angeles. Harold Finch's life had changed, but not in the way movies often depict. He did not become a famous writer. His name didn't adorn bookstore windows, and he still drank his morning tea at the same old windowsill, adjusting his glasses and gazing at the city. But something had changed forever. Now, he received letters, real, paper ones, sometimes with drawings, sometimes with poems. From retirees, schoolchildren, widows, veterans, and those who felt like no one was listening to them anymore. These letters came from all over the world. One envelope from Brazil was handwritten so tightly that it was almost impossible to open without tearing it. Inside were just 2 words. "You saved me." He read them all. Kept them in a shoebox. Sometimes he would pull them out, place them next to some cookies, and read them one by one, as if they were candles in the dark. One day, to his surprise, another letter arrived from Adam Sandler. "Dear Harold, I have a request for you. This year, I want our foundation's final evening to take place not in Los Angeles, but in your hometown. In that same veteran's house, where you once sat with a vacant gaze. I want you to be not a guest, but the host of the evening. And one more thing. We've done something. I'll tell you in secret, we've published a collection of your stories. It's called Voice in the Silence. The first print run is 1,000 copies. It will be released on the evening of the event. I hope you're not upset that we surprised you a little. With gratitude. Adam." A collection. A real book. Harold held it in his hands like a relic. The cover featured an old bench in the park, where he had once jotted something in a notebook. On the back was his photo, the one taken in the coffee shop, when he still didn't know why he lived. He didn't cry. But inside, something tightened, as if some invisible, kind heart had hugged him tightly. The evening took place in late autumn. The leaves were golden, the sky clear. The veteran's house was decorated with garlands, a projector was set up, and musicians were invited. But the main event was the evening of stories. Dozens of people came. Some in wheelchairs, some with canes, some with grandchildren. Many held copies of the collection, some with bookmarks, some with notes in the margins. Harold stepped onto the stage to applause he hadn't heard even in his youth. He adjusted the microphone and said, "Once, I thought my words were useless. I wrote to keep from losing my mind in silence. But now I understand that a word is not just sound. It's a bridge. And you helped me build that bridge." He read the story, a short, sad, but kind one. About a person who lived in a room full of books and one day realized that all those books were about him. And that every word in them was like a footprint in the snow, if you don't notice it, it disappears. There was silence in the hall. Then, standing ovation. Adam Sandler arrived later. Without fanfare, without the press. He sat at the back of the hall, wearing a gray cap, not wanting to draw attention. After the evening, he approached Harold and simply said, You were the hero of this story. I just lent a hand. You used it to lift yourself up. Harold smiled. You know, when I was young, I thought a hero was someone who saved people from fire or flew in a cape. But now I understand, a true hero is someone who stops, looks at another, and simply doesn't pass by. They stood in silence, like old friends who didn't need words. A few weeks later, the newspapers wrote, "Voice in the Silence has sold 15,000 copies." The Sandler Foundation announced the launch of the Letters for the Future program, a project where elderly people write letters to the youth. The project is based on Harold Finch's story. But Harold didn't care much about all of that. He lived just like before. Only now, as he walked down the street, people would stop him. You're that Harold? Can I shake your hand? My mom read your book and started writing again. Thank you. You have no idea how much you helped me, even without knowing it. He nodded. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude. On Christmas, a box arrived. There was no name on the sender's label. Inside was a note. When you spoke, you gave me a voice too. Thank you for finding the strength to be heard. The one who once sat on that same bench. Inside the box was a scarf. Knit. Blue, the color Harold loved. He put it on that same day. And went for a walk through the city. Passers-by walked by, some nodding, some smiling. Some simply looked with a slight hope in their eyes. Just like he used to look, on some ordinary day when an actor, rushing about his business, simply didn't walk past. Epilogue, the letter that wasn't sent. A draft of a letter found in Harold's notebook a month after his 78th birthday. Dear Adam, I don't know if you'll ever read this. But if you do, know this, you changed my life, not by giving me $100. But by listening to me. Thank you for reminding me that even in the quietest of voices, an entire universe lives. And sometimes, to save someone's soul, all you have to do is stop. Sincerely, Harold Finch.